The Mount Air Monster, written by Mr. Sean. With a name like Mount Air, you might imagine a story set in a dense, remote forest at the foot of a towering mountain. In reality, Mount Air is a one-traffic light suburb on a state route halfway between the state capital and a reasonably sized small town. Once upon a time, it boasted a decent pool, but that was torn down in the late 90s to make way for a block of overpriced apartments just down the road from an upscale grocery store. There isn't much to Mount Air, and honestly, there never was. I first heard about the Mount Air monster while sitting around the pool with my friends, wolfing down airheads and waiting for Adult Swim to end so we could all get back to swimming. "You've never heard of the Mount Air monster?" asked Tommy Danbeck. Tommy was that kid everyone had in their childhood, the one with an uncle who worked for Nintendo and knew all the Pokemon secrets, and another who was an executive at Toys R Us and could get him any toy he wanted. If Tommy had as many uncles as he claimed, his grandparents must have spent most of their lives creating this supposed brood. None of us had ever been to Tommy's house, so we couldn't prove he was lying. Suffice to say, though, we didn't put much faith in his tale of the Mount Air monster. "It lives in a cave in the woods. It's 9 feet tall and covered in shaggy fur. It abducts kids on their way home from the pool," Tommy declared. The last part was supposed to scare us, but since our moms always drove us to the pool, none of us were worried about some knockoff suburban Bigfoot snatching us out of a minivan. You're probably expecting me to say, "We should have listened to Tommy," before recounting a harrowing encounter with the beast, but this is not that kind of story. Tommy's tale of a shaggy cave-dwelling monster was barely a footnote in my childhood, a yarn spun by a chronic liar. It would be years before I even remembered it. Thinking back on the story and curious to see if there was any truth to this supposed legend, I did some digging. This is when I learned the real story of the Mount Air monster. His name was Jude Morgan, and he didn't live in a cave in the woods. He lived in one of the many houses along the riverbank. By all appearances, Jude was a mostly normal, if awkward and solitary man who worked a regular job in the city and kept to himself. He didn't abduct kids at the pool. In fact, he seemed to avoid children altogether. Other than the location, Tommy's tale had nothing to do with the truth of the Mount Air monster's activities. Jude's transformation from a mild-mannered nobody to modern-day boogeyman began in the early 1970s, many years before Tommy spun his flimsy yarn. In his early 30s, Jude somehow found himself in a relationship with a woman named Susan Pollins. From what people recalled, they appeared to be a happy couple. It's still not entirely clear what happened, but according to Jude, one night Susan went crazy and attacked him. While defending himself, he pushed her away, and she struck her head on a coffee table, killing her instantly. The police, and the rest of the world, might have believed that story more if not for what he did afterward. While the details of Susan's death remain speculative, it seemed to awaken something in Jude. A serial killer cliché that could almost be considered humorous if not for the very real loss of human life. Jude began bringing women back to his home and ending their lives in various ways. Some were strangled, some were bludgeoned, one was even stabbed. Most of his victims were professionals he paid to come to his home. But he managed to charm at least one woman into coming home with him willingly. Her name was Jennifer Wilwicker, and she suffered the worst fate of any of the monster's prey. Apparently tired of the more mundane methods of murder, Jude dug a pit in his basement 3 feet wide and 10 feet deep, topped with a heavy metal latch door with a porthole window. The nearby river caused this pit to slowly fill with water, which Jude had to pump out constantly. He threw Jennifer into this pit and sealed it shut, gleefully watching over the week as the pit filled with water. He relished Jennifer's pleas to be let out, her terror as the water rose, and her final choked gasps as the dingy river water filled her lungs. Eventually, Jude slipped up, and one of his intended victims escaped, leading the police to his home. While Jude was nowhere to be found, the police discovered a suicide note stating his intent to throw himself into the river. They also found Jennifer's decaying body still floating in the sealed pit in Jude's now flooded basement. 5 additional bodies were buried behind his home on the riverbank. 4 were identified as local sex workers, but the other woman remains unidentified to this day. Jude's body was never found, and there have been no confirmed sightings of him since. One can only hope he did what he claimed in his note, but who can say for sure? So that is the truth of the Mount Air monster. All I can say is, I prefer Tommy's version. Hi everyone, it's Mr. Sean, and thank you for listening to today's story. Last week, over 1,000 of you tuned in to listen to my original creepypasta story, The Incident of 81, and I took all of your comments to heart, both the compliments and the criticism, in my attempts to make this story even better. I still don't consider myself much of a writer, but I'm trying, and I thank you all for any comments you had on the quality of the last story, and hope that you will comment on this one as well. Please be sure to give the video a like if you enjoyed it, and subscribe if you haven't already. We're trying to reach 1,000 subscribers by the end of the year, and we're at just over 800 right now, so we're getting there. And if you would like to help support the channel monetarily, of course you can become a channel member, join the Patreon, or check out my various minis and collectibles over on eBay and Mercari. Links to all of this can be found in the description. Again, thank you all so much for joining me today, and until next time, I'm Mr. Sean, this is Chimera Miniatures, and I sincerely hope that you alpha great day, and an even beta tomorrow. Bye-bye.